Easy and reductive way of describing First Light would be to say that it's an Uncharted-style directed action mixed with Hitman-style open-ended zones. That in itself sounds pretty hot, right? Sold. But it's also a description that totally undersells the experience. The developers at IO Interactive describe a game that has a split down the middle. So what IO calls guided gameplay is the stuff that we might use Nathan Drake as shorthand for. Linear action set pieces that take you from A to B to C in a tightly controlled path. Core gameplay, meanwhile, is the stuff that's more Hitman-esque, with open pathways that you can forge a way through. You might go full stealth, for instance, darting from cover to cover and hiding in tall grass or behind desks and cabinets. You might use traversal to skirt around the outside of a level, avoiding the guards entirely. Or you could channel your inner 1997 and just start blasting, within reason. I'll talk more about that later. But the point is, the choice is largely yours. The 007 First Light preview hands-on that I did for a little over 3 hours offered up a pretty great slice to demonstrate these ideas. The game's introduction, which was the first thing I played, sees a brooding and silent Bond aboard a Royal Marine helicopter on a mission. Now, the Bond we join here isn't the seasoned commander we know. In fact, he's just an air crewman, so basically a recruit. And the mission quickly goes wrong in the way that Bond intro sequences do, and he ends up crashed, beached, alone. And at one point he's told over communication that he has a less than 1% chance of success. But he's James Bond, so he goes for it, obviously. Now what you get here initially is a short level, pre-tutorial even, which gives you a glimpse at both styles of play. The game seamlessly switches back and forth between stuff that is entirely guided and small little zones where you have a bit of choice. I guess I'd call it an hourglass structure. You know, it's thick and then thin and then thick and it weaves in and out. And in the end, everything will funnel you back to the same place for the next big mandatory set piece. But even in the game's introduction, it's surprising how many pathways and options there appear to be to take. In the end, a wry quip sends Bond crashing into the previously released title sequence. And then IO Interactive skip me forward a little way up to the true tutorial mission that gives you all the game's mechanics. Bond, in this case, is in training on a British Army base in Malta. He's one of many new young 00 agents being put through their paces. And so this challenge is a microcosm of the game, a compact but many-path level where as part of Bond's training, you have to reach and capture a flag. But how you do it is entirely up to you. Now, this expresses most keenly in how First Light is essentially a game about different game states. That's most heavily emphasised in the switches between melee and gunplay. Bond is an MI6 agent, he's one of the good guys in theory, so thereby he can't just indiscriminately open fire. So if you're spotted by an enemy who then becomes aggressive to you, there's a seamless sort of transition from a stealthy exploration to melee combat. And these melee battles are somewhat reminiscent of the rhythmic and counter-driven brawling of the Batman Arkham games. It's really satisfying, and it's got a delightful Bondian touch of an emphasis on the blunt and brutal environmental play. Smashing people into walls, picking up beer bottles from countertops to dome somebody with, and so on. I think of Pierce Brosnan smashing a henchman over the head with an ashtray in Tomorrow Never Dies as I do similar in the game, and I think, yep, that's legitimate. That tracks. And if you're able to beat the enemies at this stage, you'll transition back to the stealthy mode as the game's UI tells you that the situation has been contained. But the moment an enemy draws a weapon with which they intend to use deadly force, the game state changes again. Your license to kill is activated. Now, this is a brilliant use of Bond terminology and iconography, but it's also just flat-out clever game design, clearly delineating the different modes of gameplay. You can keep brawling while attempting to dodge enemy fire if you want, but at this stage, a squeeze of the trigger draws your weapon and you're good to go with smooth, snappy and satisfying shooting. Throughout this demo, Bond only carries a sidearm by default, so once you're in that mode, it's up to you to secure bigger and better boomsticks in the environment or from downed enemies. One thing I want to stress here is that 007 First Light shares many elements and systems with Hitman, but it assuredly does not feel the same. It's quite astonishing, in fact, how different IO has succeeded in making Agent 007 feel when compared to Agent 47, despite the fact that the two clearly share much behind the scenes, be that an engine or code or whatever else.
Thanks, Eugene.
Ultimately, Bond is scrappy, fluid and loose, where 47 is deliberate and rigid. When you get into a big gunfight in Hitman, it's really stressful because the monk-like 47's control scheme and the game feel is not really built for one-on-many encounters. You get overwhelmed quick. Bond, however, is able to handle that. The main difference between the two is arguably that 47 is always applying the brakes, while no matter what the situation in First Light, Bond is always maintaining that forward momentum. That situation-contained UI element speaks to another crucial difference between the games, actually. In Hitman's Rube Goldberg machine levels, being spotted or going into combat can quickly cascade in terms of AI interactions and the like, into the whole level becoming a war zone, and oftentimes you'll just end up restarting. First Light seems to go to great pains to divide its even larger levels into more discrete zones, meaning that even if you totally screw up one zone and it turns into a bloodbath as the bullets fly, there'll be a certain point where the situation resets, ready for the next zone. And while there are clear mechanical lines between the different modes of gameplay I describe, moment to moment each switch feels completely seamless. It's not like you're actually moving from one mode to another. The skills are transferable between the two to some degree also, so take Bond's gadgets. In stealth mode, the laser from Q Branch's souped up Omega Seamaster watch can be used to create environmental distractions like dropping a chandelier from the ceiling. But in exploration and traversal, that same laser could be used to shoot a lock off a door to open a new path. Or in combat, a quick blast of the watch laser could blind an enemy at a critical moment, giving you a few seconds to get to cover or to reload. There's a range of multifunctional gadgets along these lines. As with Hitman's environmental play, there seems to be scope for great fun with them too, triggering traps to knock out enemies or to cause distractions or just to cause mayhem to watch that cascading effect, which like I said is a little more contained here. There's the promise of more types of gadget as the game progresses too. In short, what I'm getting at is that the interplay between stealth, melee, shooting and gadgets feels well balanced. The third and final chunk of this hands-on was a third level that was set in London. Now I want to give you a quick and relatively spoiler-free walkthrough of the flow of this level to give you an idea of how the game is likely to play at large. So, let's do that. That level opens with a casual, narrative-heavy exploration of a revealing environment. An assassin then tries to kill Bond, and there's a thrilling A to B action sequence where you've got to try and reach someone as they fire on you while utilising cover and gadgets to get there unscathed. Fast forward, some cutscenes, a little bit more action, and Bond finds himself at a high society party. Your first job there is to obtain an invitation to actually get into the party in what is a Hitman-style open-world zone. So you might find an invite discarded or misplaced somewhere, or you could distract and steal one directly from a partygoer. Once you get inside, there's layers of security, meaning you've got to use your smarts to find ways past the guards to get into different areas. You could do this by stealing access passes or by pretending to be someone you're not, and you'll gather leads on doing this by eavesdropping on or outright charming the other party attendees. In these scenarios, it's impossible to transition the game to a combat state. Bond isn't just going to start punching people in a crowded party, so you can't do that. That again differentiates it from the do-whatever chaos of Hitman, where an accidental button press can have you just punch someone in the middle of a dance floor. Eventually, though, the mission leads Bond to the event's security offices. Here you've got more options: stealth, melee, bluffing, even license to kill. So stealth could be sneaking, but it could also be attached to that bluffing. It could be you using some of Bond's instinct and limited resource to act like he's supposed to be there, giving him free rein to roam in front of many guards unless a higher level enforcer guard who knows who his team are and knows who he's meant to be there and will know Bond isn't one of those people spots you. That's a mechanic, by the way, the Hitman players will know is borrowed wholesale from Hitman, and it works great here. Eventually, this section leads towards a cool boss battle that has an emphasis on gadgets that actually reminded me a bit of some of the better boss battles of the most recent Deus Ex games. After that, the events tighten to the more cinematic. There's multiple choice dialogue option chattiness, some narratively enforced sneaking around, and then you're dropped into a great big battle arena as armour-clad enemies flood through the doorway. Even this zone is quite interesting though. So in this zone, License to Kill is permanently activated, and the enemies know Bond is present and are there specifically to kill him. But you don't necessarily have to get behind cover and treat it like you're playing Gears of War. If you want, you can use the environment and gadgets to disable those would-be assailants, or you can sneak around and take out the hit squad in stealth and melee one by one. In these core zones, you can also see the seeds for how IO Interactive plans to keep First Light running, with the challenge missions and the like in what it's going to call its tax sim mode, which will allow the game to live on beyond story completion, just as they've accomplished with the Hitman trilogy. Finally, the level hurtles to a conclusion which involves an unlikely commandeered vehicle and a car chase of sorts through the streets of London, which of course is entirely linear. Now, to be clear, all of the above is one seamless mission, which ebbs and flows through the different game states and styles that First Light offers. I honestly thought it was bloody brilliant. There's one final bit of solid gold threaded throughout all of this to seal the deal though, and that is James Bond himself. I can't say much beyond that. Patrick Gibson absolutely embodies the character. He is Bond, aided of course by brilliant animation efforts from the team at IOI. This version of the character is pure energy, which perfectly matches the constant momentum of the game. What you need to understand, of course, is that this is a different version of Bond. Gibson clearly eyes the other holders of the role, and the version from the books, but he does his own thing. I think he has the right mix of cool detachment and smug self-assurance to make the role sing, though. Also, I never really considered until I played it how Bond's penchant for deadpan quips is absolutely perfect for a third-person action game character who, yes, on occasion, talks to himself to fill the dead air. Anyway, the long story short is that I laughed out loud at several one-liners in this 3-hour slice, without Gibson's Bond coming over as a silly caricature. This is already a pretty long preview. I've been writing about games for a long time, and usually such a long transcript only runs away with you in two scenarios: when something is shaping up to be rubbish, or when something is shaping up to be truly special. 3 hours has convinced me that First Light is pretty likely to be the latter, and I really hope that IO Interactive sticks the landing next month.